On this episode of the Unselects, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose.
Sometimes you win, even when you lose. I'm Brian Costello.
And I'm Gregg Richards, and we are the Unselects. All right, Brian, since the last episode, a lot of things have happened. We had an election, and what happened?
We won.
But
we lost.
We lost.
Yeah.
We won.
Yeah.
But I do want to thank the 2,223 Shrewsbury voters who did come out and vote no and allowed your voice to be heard. Even though we didn't hit the 20% required threshold on voter turnout to overturn the referendum, it was a 61 to 39% victory. Very, very clear that the no vote was the winner as far as public opinion, let's say throughout town. We actually ended up winning 9 out of 10 precincts. There was only one precinct where the yes vote prevailed. So I would say that that was pretty much a referendum on the yes or no, correct?
Yeah, people actually went out on a February afternoon and took the time and made their voice heard.
Yeah, which is what we really wanted from the beginning. We said all along, we just thought it was something important enough that the town as a whole should be able to vote on it. We did, and I think we were right as far as the responsible choice. And let's take a look, though, at how the town, I think, positioned the election or lack thereof. So the first thing I want to show is the press release. We were actually at Town Hall when this was done. We were waiting patiently at the window, and the clerk ran off to the town manager's office to get these numbers out. So essentially, you can see it just says, hey, while the no vote outnumbered the yes, it failed to meet the threshold. And there you see 2,222, which was revised to 23 to 1398. Really no mention in this about anything else about what that really meant or acknowledging the no side, just saying, hey, you didn't meet the threshold. The next thing I want to go to is a video here of the planning board, because if you don't remember, or just to remind people, the planning board is the one responsible for putting articles up to town meeting. So they're the one who essentially crafted and created the MBTA zoning. So let's listen to the chairperson of the planning board and his comments regarding the vote on the 4th.
Since the time of our last meeting, our Beale School decision was affirmed by the land court, and the attempt to override the town meeting vote relative to MBTA communities fell short.
So he actually mentions 2 cases. And we don't have time. We're not going to get into the Beale decision today. But, essentially saying, hey, a decision was affirmed by the land court and it failed to meet the threshold. In both cases, not once, validating both times group of residents had concerns, and validating that, while, not going to court isn't a decision anybody takes lightly, and even going to a referendum is something that I don't think people take lightly. But really, I just didn't have a sense of anybody validating those on the no side by addressing, we really pushed hard, the select board, planning board, town manager, really pushed hard to get that yes vote and really confident that that was the right way. And when the vote came in, not once did they say, you know what, maybe we missed something.
Yeah, no, there's no recognition of the fact that they might be wrong. Mr. Rodolikas said that, it was almost disdainful, right? And
Yeah.
We've seen that happen before, kind of disdain from public boards. And I just see that you could have acknowledged, we did see citizens care about this.
Yeah. And if we kind of go look at the turnout, I want to talk a little bit about it, because due to, I think, at least my belief, based off being so involved with this, that it wasn't addressed and it wasn't validated. I actually did go speak at the select board to voice that concern. But before we go into that meeting, I did want to just talk a little bit about the voter turnout.
Yeah.
That was 13.7% turnout. Now, that's fairly typical of what you see for the town election, unfortunately. And I did make a comment to that. I wish there would be more participation. I encourage everyone out there that on the municipal level, you have a lot more ability to impact what's going on with those votes. And it's unfortunate that more people end up going, a lot more, in the federal elections that are heavily publicized, and these municipal elections for select board, school committee, and town meeting, we just don't get the turnout. The highest turnout I think we saw here was in 2021, there was 29%, and that's because there's an override question. So when
Right.
you're coming after somebody's wallet, they tend to show up, right?
Yeah.
And I think we could even look at some of the select board members too, of just some raw numbers. So we said 2,223 voted no. When John Samuel, the chairman, had run, he got 2,293 votes. Michelle Conlon, 2,323. Beth Cassavant, 1985. Mr. Garcia there, 1661. So not very similar, right? Or even less than kind of what the no vote was. So one other thing I will mention, just out there, I think it's a good time as any, is I did announce that I'm running for select board.
Congratulations.
No, thank you. And it wasn't something I took lightly, I'll be honest, because, there is a lot going on. And if you're going to do something like that, you want to be invested in it. But I think it was just throughout this process, I just got frustrated that, the residents were not being put first. And I always felt like the viewpoint of the residents were not being put first. Because in my view, a board is there to serve the residents, right? You're a public servant. It's not what you truly believe in. It's not what other people are pushing upon you. You're supposed to advocate and represent the residents. And I just don't feel like we have it. And that's why I want to run. And I hope, that our viewers will support me as we go through this process. But I just thought I'd just say that now.
You have my vote.
Well, thank you.
First of all. But I think the thing that I want to call out is during this special election, think about that when we look at the town elections, which everybody knows is going to happen
Yep.
in May, right? It happens every couple of years. It's there. This was a rushed election that did not really get advertised that heavily and still got more people out on average, or about the same, but a little bit more than the last town election, right? More people came out. And so what you saw was, imagine if we had more time. Imagine if people did learn about this. How many people actually commented on our posts post-election? There was an election?
Right.
What was this about, right? Yeah, I understand, right? And so I think that shows that if this were held, for instance, during the town election, we probably would have had a lot more people turn out.
Yeah, and here's the unfortunate thing, and I've learned a lot, right? The reason I like to do these things, they're a good learning experience. I think you have to learn.
Yeah.
No matter how old you get, right? You always want to learn from something. And unfortunately, money is such a huge factor in campaigns, even on the local level. We're going to talk about that today when it comes to the yes side and the funding there. Because I don't think people understand, a lot of people commented on, oh, well, I got flyers only from the yes side. I'm like, do you know how expensive it is to send a flyer to everyone in town, especially when you're just relying on fellow residents to throw in a few dollars that they might have to do it? So we are going to get a lot into that, and I think that's really important to talk about. But what I do want to go to now is back to that select board meeting which I spoke. And one of the comments with Mr. Samia after he had commented on my speech, which you can go and watch, is about his perception of why the turnout was so low. Let's listen.
But couldn't you also take the position that not more people didn't vote because they were comfortable with the process? Don't people vote? You get large turnout. If you look at over the last 5 years, a larger turnout when we had a specific item on the ballot. So couldn't you also interpret it that people were comfortable with the vetting process and the voting turnout was lower?
What's your thought on that?
Well, I think it's not right. And I think most of it was the fact that if you look at past, that's basically saying then 1,985 people that voted for Beth Cassavant, obviously nobody really wanted her. It's just that, whatever, right? I think the argument is facetious because there wasn't enough time to really put enough in front of people. But more importantly, there was a lot of money spent actually for the yes side.
Yeah, and I think other mindset, because I've heard this from people as well, I don't like the mindset, but I know that people have that, is like my vote doesn't matter, or it's not, nothing's going to change. No matter if I go, how is that really going to affect the outcome? So it's not worth my time. And I think the other thing would be similar to the municipal election, maybe, to use Mr. Samuel's logic, is who cares who's in there because they don't really represent me.
My voice
or
is not
my
gonna be
voice is
heard.
not going to be heard anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You raise a good point. It's sort of like it's not so much I'm satisfied, it's apathy or defeat. It's defeatism in a way, right? I don't think I'm going to make a difference.
Exactly. Now, the other comments were made by Teresa Flynn because they did both comment after I spoke, which is rare. I would say. Unusual, which I'm totally fine with. And I appreciate the fact they did. I wish we would do that more. I wish there would be more open dialogue in the select board meetings. And that would be one thing I advocate for is should be more like an open dialogue, not this, closed session type of mindset. But one thing I want to listen to what she says is about talking about why certain people voted no and how, in her belief, that might not have been what the election was about. So let's listen.
I talked to people who signed your petition. I talked to people who voted no. And I heard everything from, well, I want to vote against MBTA zoning, which is not what this election was about. They noted that they wanted to prevent 1,500 apartments from going in, which is not going to happen regardless. And then they were just mad. They were mad at the state. They wanted to send a message. And I continue to say that, there are consequences of not following a law.
Yeah, we're not going to go into the nuances of what was the law or not at the time. But I think the earlier comment is, do you have the ability to tell somebody why they should or shouldn't vote a certain way?
Well, certainly if you're Ms. Flynn, you do, because she did. But the reality is she can read into anything she wants, but people are motivated because of their beliefs. Right? Why do you vote for a certain person? Oftentimes it's because you believe in what they're saying, but also they align to your beliefs. But the idea that she thinks it's invalid that they voted in a certain way because they used their thought process is ridiculous.
Yeah, or such a thing, well, you're wrong to vote no because you want to send a message to the state. No, you should vote.
Absolutely.
Go out and vote if you want to send a message. If that's why you're going to vote, you're 100% within your bounds to do so, like you said. So that was the only thing. I don't think you should, I guess it's not really in her purview to sit there and say, well, this election wasn't about that, so you got it wrong because how silly of you not to know that this is more specific about our specific plan. And I think it's good for people to go out and vote their conscience regardless, right? Yeah. I do want to go here to Needham Select Board. Actually, a member of the Select Board, in full transparency, actually met Josh. He's a Select Board member of Needham. And he actually talked after their referendum. They had a similar referendum to ours, they on the MBTA communities. They actually did get enough people out in the threshold. And they overturned town's meeting decision. But one thing I want to listen to is how he articulates the process and I think tries to validate in understanding that these are contentious and that maybe there's another way that the select board should look at that. So let's listen to Josh from Needham.
The past 3 months have been very divisive for our town. Relationships among neighbors have been strained, and the representation promised by our representative government has been called into question. 58.4% of the electorate voted to overturn the zoning. This is larger than the 56.7% margin by which the zoning was initially passed by town meeting. There is no metric by which the results of the referendum can be considered a close call. I suggest that the Select Board call a special town meeting as soon as possible to ask that the base compliance plan be enacted by town meeting. I also suggest that the Select Board conduct a post-incident review to develop specific practices of good governance in order to prevent similar controversies from boiling over in the future. The underlying premise of a referendum is to ensure that voters are heard. We must expeditiously and faithfully comply with the vote of the electorate.
Whew.
Where'd that guy come from?
He's a good guy. I mean, he's really, I did have coffee with him and I really enjoyed the conversation, but I mean, just think, that was so refreshing to hear, faithfully execute, what the actual voters want.
Listen to resident concerns.
Right. And
we saw it in Framingham too.
Yeah.
We're seeing it here in Needham.
Post-mortem. That's a great idea. Just say, hey, are there things along the way? What did we do in the process? Was it a communication issue?
Yeah.
Was it, a perception that we were pushing people in one direction to vote versus the other? Or was there did we more clarification on maybe some of the details around the vote? Whatever it is, just conceptually, it's like, hey, maybe we should pause and just look at this again so that in the future this doesn't happen. I know it didn't happen in 30 years in Shrewsbury, but I really have to applaud him for just kind of giving that speech there. And,
Yeah, just a mea culpa, right? Like, hey, I think we screwed something up,
right.
right? And I think our select board has to, and our planning board and others have to admit that maybe we messed this up. Maybe we messed up the communication process, and they'll go through, but we had a lot of meetings, right?
Yeah, and I'm not even arguing that. I think that they can still have the belief and still think that
Yeah.
that's the right way to do it, but it's all about how you would do it. And I go back even to the warehouse projects, right? It was really about, if you tell people up front what the expectations, what the process is, it's hard to argue at the end. And I think that's something we could work on. So next we're going to go back and hear some more comments with Teresa Flynn from the select board meeting on the 11th, and listen to her comments about where we should be pushing, or at least where we should be complaining when it comes to MBTA zoning.
And I said this in a prior meeting, that if I was voting on MBTA zoning, I would be a hard no. And when people ask me, well, what are you going to do about it? I tell them the same thing that I do. You talk to your state legislators. You talk to the state level. They are the ones that are forcing this down on us. But as a select board member, just saying no and being at risk for being sued or just having the state come in and do what they want, I don't think is in anyone's best interest.
Okay, let's just break this down a little bit because we're going to go into this in some more detail. So she's suggesting we go to our state representative, which is Hannah Kane.
Yes.
Now, unfortunately, in the state of Massachusetts, it's effectively a one-party state. And I'll tie this into the federal side, right? When you have, let's say, the party in power, typically that leader, let's say the president, kind of heads up the party. So in the state level, that's the governor, right? So the governor, Maura Healey, is a part of the Democratic Party. The legislature in the state of Massachusetts, both House and Senate, heavily Democratic, like super majorities in both.
Yep.
So when you are the governor and you have a specific initiative, the leadership of those parties, it locks step with your initiatives. Any bills or anything that could go to, let's say, affect those or prevent those from going into practice or something that gets passed are heavily fought against. Fair?
Yeah.
So if I have, in Hannah Kane, and I know she signed on to a bill, I believe, is part of the legislative session, which there's thousands of early in January that they fill out. She signed on to a bill that was trying to exempt communities that don't have direct rail service.
Yeah.
Which for us, great. Adjacent community no longer applies. The problem is, and I think even on her own admission, there's no chance of that bill going anywhere.
There's no risk of doing it.
No risk. Yeah. And even if it did, let's say, get out of committee, the leadership wouldn't put it on the floor. And then even if they passed it, what would the governor do?
Veto it.
She'd veto it.
2/3 majority
Right.
to overrule, so it's never going to happen.
So it's no chance. So signing on to that, in a way, saying go to your representatives, okay, great, but why was Hannah Kane? Why would she be motivated?
Yeah.
Not only that, we're going to go to a clip here and show that, I don't know, there might be a little personal conflict of interest, that she's not that motivated to really try to advocate, let's say, for Shrewsbury on the MBTA zoning and housing. And let's take a listen, and you tell me after this if there's a conflict.
Massachusetts' housing crisis firmly in focus for state and local leaders, touting 14 affordable housing projects spread out across the Commonwealth, creating more than 1,100 affordable units for seniors and families.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Jim Kane. I'm President and CEO of the 80 Makepeace Company. On behalf of our Board of Directors and Bob Karam, our Chairman, I'd like to welcome all of you here today. I'd like to also state a sincere thanks to the town of Plymouth. And I'd like to also obviously thank the administration, the governor, lieutenant governor, and the secretary for putting money where their mouths have been.
$158 million will be funneled into those projects, comprised of state tax breaks and subsidies, along with nearly $30 million in federal low-income housing tax credits.
It's why we've been leaning in on all the tools. MBTA Communities Act, the vast majority of communities have come online in compliance.
It's now my pleasure to introduce our Secretary of Housing and Livable Communities, Ed Augustus.
The continued implementation of the MBTA Communities Act, and I would just say 118 communities have already passed the zoning necessary to comply with the law. And in the zones that have been created, more than 3,000 units are already in the pipeline. That law is working.
All right, let's break this one down. I just want to walk people through this just so we can tie the dots together. Now, look, this is 100% this is not, say, speculation, but I'm just going to lay out the facts that I know, and I'm not implying anything right now. All I can say is that this was, I don't know if it was the 16th, 18th, this was not that long ago in February. So Jim Kane, moderator, Shrewsbury, also married to Hannah Kane, state rep.
Yeah.
If we go back 31st of January, EOHLC letter signed by Ed Augustus, who we just met there, right? Saying, hey, we've reviewed everything, you've skipped over 78 communities. If everything goes the way we think it should on the 4th, you guys are good to go. Lock
Former city manager of Worcester.
Former city manager of Worcester. We're fine. So on that letter was Hannah Kane and Michael Moore. So knowing that your husband is also going to be with the governor, because this had to have been planned by then, right? These things don't get planned like 2 days out.
Oh, yeah, of
Town of
course.
Plymouth is planning department. There's a whole big thing. 80 Makepeace owns tons of land in Massachusetts. Also is the largest cranberry grower, I think, in the state for.
It's the largest cranberry grower in the state, and I believe in the Ocean Spray Co-op.
Very good. So Ed Augustus, Maura Healy, and Kim Driscoll, all with Mr. Kane at a ribbon cutting, if you will, in Plymouth.
Yeah.
Do you think there was ever dialogue, or do you think Hannah Kane, let's say, is really pushing, let's say, to go against the EOHLC, or really trying to make any waves with the governor when it comes to housing bills?
Probably not. And you also have to consider that when you're the vast minority party, the thing you want is committee assignments as well. You don't push too hard on the other side, because there are reasons that you would want to be friendly. And I would say that obviously, look, Mr. Kane works for a cranberry company that somehow has become a giant development company by shutting down cranberry bogs because this is more lucrative.
It might be a little bit more profitable
Yeah,
than berries.
Little more profitable than berries. I'd say read into it as you will.
Yeah, and there probably is honestly nothing nefarious, but it's just that the politics.
Well, you got to play the politics,
You got to play the
right?
politics, right? So you're not going to push that hard one way or another because, hey, you scratch my back, I scratch
Right, he's a
yours.
development guy,
Right.
and they need development. This is a law that helps them get development, and more importantly, helps them get a lot of cash from the governor.
Right.
You're going to play.
Exactly. So let's just pivot back to Mr. Mizikar on February 11th, too, because he's going to make some comments about the EUHLC with Mr. Augustus there, about Shrewsbury after the vote, what his office had to end up doing. So let's take a listen.
As a result of the February 4th, 2025 special referendum election, resulting in upholding the action of the special town meeting related to Article 9 of the November 18th, 2024 special town meeting, staff has moved forward with submitting all required documentation to the Attorney General's Office and Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. We have received confirmation that will not be required to submit an action plan. And we have achieved interim compliance, and we are now just awaiting formal compliance notification from EOHLC.
Now, here's why I'm confused, right? Once again, we're going to go back. Let's pull this letter up that they sent, Friday, last day before the weekend, before the election. The reason I'm confused is because we got a letter and it said, we already submitted a district application, and they reviewed it, and they determined that it meets the requirements, and if the action was approved through our town meeting or through the special election, which it was, EOHLC already determined we would be compliant.
Yeah.
So what possibly else would we need to submit back to the EOHLC?
Nobody knows.
Because-
Paperwork, emails, letters, documents.
So either we were approved on the 31st or we weren't, because then he's like, we don't have to submit an action plan and everything else. I'm like, we got a letter that said we were all set. Like, I don't understand.
Well, what's crazier is there's nothing to comply to yet.
I know.
So you actually can't even be compliant, as we know. But it's all good kabuki theater, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's like I almost wanted to stand up there and I wanted to raise my hand and say, I'm confused. Can you help explain? Because I thought, but you just said we had a letter that said we were good.
Yeah, but we need the compliance letter about the compliance letter that refers back to the compliance letter.
Apparently.
Yeah.
Apparently. All right. Well, we're going to transition over to the state level here. We're going to go to a couple comments from our governor, Maura Healy. Actually, she mentions Shrewsbury, and I'm going to ask in this video, Brian, who is she talking to here? So let's listen.
We're out there enforcing the MBTA Communities Act. The good news on all of that, and thank you to Shrewsbury the other night, we're up to 116 communities have said yes to new housing, which is good. This is about vibrancy. This is about growth. This is about economic viability and sustainability for our state. It is not one size fits all. Each community is different in terms of how they want to do the housing. But if we don't build more housing, if we don't bring more housing online, we're going to lose people, we're going to lose employers, and we will suffer.
Ooh, we're going to suffer.
We're going to suffer.
But there's a lot of fluffy words there. Vibrancy.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of things out there. But let me just ask you this question. Who in Shrewsbury is she talking to? Because I don't think she's talking to residents there, because why would you thank those who overwhelmingly voted against your plan?
Yeah, she's thanking the politicians for towing the line. Simple and sweet. She's thanking the select board, the planning board, the town manager, planning. That's it. She's not thanking the residents. Thank you. When she says thank you, Shrewsbury, she's saying thank you, select board, for doing your best to tamp down the concerns of the residents.
And this is a huge disconnect, I think, just in politics in general. Just think about this. Here you have somebody who supposedly is elected by the people to serve the people, however, is pushing down things nobody wants. We're cudgeling 118 communities into compliance. We're thanking towns for voting against our measures. And you're standing up on public TV here, WGBH, I should say, right? PBS, right? To do so. And
let's face it, she's also thanking herself and the people that she set up to make this election. But
I don't think that's the way it's supposed to work. No. I mean, I think that's another reason why, I had to run here, is that it just seems so out of balance that the people who put you in there and you're supposed to speak on their behalf, you're essentially flipping it completely and just forcing things down upon them. So let's listen to one more comment she has here, because she's going to talk a little bit about her beliefs on the development here and what the next phase of MBTA is. And there's no shocker here, so let's take a listen.
First thing we had to do is sort of, make sure that cities and towns were doing what they needed to do around zoning reform. The other piece of this, and it's something that we started on last year, is actually getting stuff built. Because it's one thing to say you're zoned for building. It's another thing to say, here's the tools that you need to go ahead and build. Our $5 billion bond bill that we did, the Affordable Homes Act, helps incent some of that development, helps make the math work with developers, and hopefully that means more shovels in the ground sooner on this housing development.
Two things I really want to highlight there is that it has to make the math work, right? And shovels in the ground. So effectively what she's admitting to there is, without public assistance or the state government throwing a bunch of dollars in, none of this would happen, because none of it would make sense for the developers.
Without the taxpayers being forced to give money to for-profit developers, none of this would happen.
Exactly.
Also goes back to, I thought this was a zoning bill. I thought
she's right. She did mention that a couple times.
I thought the people even on Facebook that were for the yes were like, no, it's just zoning. No, it's not.
Right.
You build it, they will come.
We just leave the shovel in the ground.
Yeah.
It's decoration.
Exactly.
It doesn't actually dig a hole. It just leaves it in the ground.
Of course
it's
not.
Fine. It's
never
fine.
happened.
So what's driving a lot of that, right? Because I'm just going to go on a limb here as well, that those developers who are getting money to make the math work, probably there's a little quid pro quo, potentially, assuming that maybe they made a couple donations into some organizations. And we're going to walk through that, because I want to remind people, and I'm going to remind people here of when we did this, what the yes side and those in favor in this community had referred to us as. They referred to us as political activists.
Yeah.
And we're going to walk through here over the next few minutes on how that is 100% upside down. That they, and I will prove it, them and their financier, right, are the political activists, and we were going to show that very specifically here. So let's take a listen back to my speech and one thing I mentioned, which, like Nostradamus, I think I was 100% correct. Let's listen. Those supporting a yes vote, have referred to us as political activists. As often occurs in politics today, one side will accuse their opponent of doing what they are in fact doing, to create confusion and attempt to distract voters from evidence of their own guilt. They're yes. Many times in politics, people accuse the other side of doing what, in fact, they are doing.
Yeah.
And we're going to go show that. So let's go back to that statement here. Remember, in the argument, in the voter guide, which some people did not ever receive or didn't receive it until late, it did say, we are political activists with ideological motivations. All right, let's take a look at who funded the Yes campaign. So these are the public disclosures. This is actually before the election, so we don't have the second one. But if you look there, we had to submit those on the 6th of January.
Yeah.
Right? On the 7th, $5,000 from One Commonwealth. The 14th, $5,000. So $10,000 from an entity called One Commonwealth coming into the Yes side. Only 2 donations from Shrewsbury residents, one of which would be the head of the Shrewsbury Democratic Committee, I believe, as well. So let's see who's the real political activist. So let's go, the next chart here is One Commonwealth on their filing with the state. They are a 501c4, which is a nonprofit. A little bit different than a 501c3, and we'll explain why that difference is there. But what does that say there? Can you read that highlighted there for me?
Yeah, One Commonwealth is organized and operated exclusively to promote social welfare and the common good and general welfare of the community.
Yeah, very specific. I know exactly what they do after reading that.
They then immediately spent all the money on a political campaign.
I have no idea what they're like. What does that mean? Social welfare, common good, and general welfare of the community. Well, let's look at a 501c4 and the rules according to the IRS. So we're going to take a look here. It says on the left there that 501c4 organizations, can they engage in political campaign activities? Well, what does it say there in yellow brown?
The regulations under IRC 501c4 provide that promotion of social welfare does not include participation or intervention in political campaigns.
Okay, so am I reading it correctly? The way I take that is, if you claim that you're for social welfare, you should not be doing political campaigns.
That seems to be the clear reading.
Okay, let's move along here and see. So, One Commonwealth, the executive director is an individual named Katie Prisco Buxbaum. Now, one couple interesting things is her Hyphenated Strategies is her own consulting company who only works on campaigns. And shockingly, one of the people she initially worked for was a campaign manager for one Andrea Campbell, who happens to be
the Attorney General of Massachusetts.
Exactly. So let's listen to Katie Prisco Buxbaum's history. She actually went to Emerson College. We're going to take a listen here to a podcast interview with one of her professors, and let's get her career history here, and we'll think. Let's determine if she's a political activist or not afterwards. Let's listen.
So my first job out of college was working at the Mass Democratic Party. I actually got first a paid fellowship with them, and then continued on with them doing some press secretary work. And then I ended up heading to Ed Markey's Senate race, doing that work, and really kind of caught the campaign bug. So after that, did the 2014 gubernatorial in Massachusetts, then went on to manage my first campaign for Andrea Campbell when she was running against Charles Yancey, a 32-year incumbent.
Yes.
Was able to win that race, and obviously now you see her as our soon-to-be sworn-in Attorney General. So really exciting to kind of be a part of that first step. And then from there, worked for Kamala Harris on her Senate race, for Gavin Newsom on his gubernatorial in California, worked for Kamala in her presidential before coming back to manage campaigns and eventually opening my own firm, working with candidates up and down the ballot.
Okay, Brian, how many presidential candidates have you worked for?
Let me think. None.
None?
Yeah, none.
How many political campaigns have you run?
None.
Any consulting you've done for political candidates?
Nope, not a thing.
Now,
yeah.
I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say that is maybe you wouldn't call her a political activist, but she's a professional person who works in the field of politics.
I would say she's the hackiest hack on Political Hack Island.
Oh.
She's the most political type of person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, she's the executive director. Now let's go and look here at a little flow chart I threw together. So here's the organization as a whole. Remember, this is where the money flew into our town of Shrewsbury, and the yes side on our end thought, yes, these are the people we should align with because this really aligns with our fellow Shrewsbury residents. So as you notice, the IRS, one thing about 501c4s is they redact the donor list. So you have no idea where the money comes from.
Yeah, it's called dark money, as a lot of people refer to it.
Right. This is, when you hear dark money, One Commonwealth is a dark money organization. So it was created by the governor and lieutenant governor, specifically around pushing housing. Now, the people underneath there, we have Dewey Square Group, the president there, she has run a campaign organizer, managed winning record in political, public, private sectors. Then we have their treasurer, which is essentially an entity over, I think since 2014 has received like $300,000 of money from Maura Healey herself, and that's just through different campaigns, which she's allowed to do. And then we have a lawyer who just donated to Healey, Driscoll, and Campbell, right? And he serves as the clerk of this organization where, all involved. So these are all political insider people.
Deeply insider people.
Right.
Yeah.
And I want to go here to another clip because I really want to show that Dewey Square Group, right? A little bit more about them. And this is actually a clip I'm going to show about another person who works for Dewey Square Group, but just to give you a feel for what that organization is all about. So let's take a listen.
Last week, a woman by the name of Minion Moore, a principal at a public affairs and consulting firm known as Dewey Square Group, or DSG as I'm going to call it throughout the rest of the segment, was announced as the chair of the 2024 Democratic National Convention. Moore is a longtime party insider. She's currently a co-chair of the DNC Rules and Bylaws Committee, and she was also CEO of the DNC back in 2001. Lyft happened to be one of DSG's clients, and they spent quite a bit of money to lobby against workers in the state of Massachusetts. So last year, DSG scored an 8-figure payday from Lyft as part of a Massachusetts campaign regarding the classification of app-based workers, so gig workers.
So that was actually a $14 million. It was, I think, one of the largest political contributions ever. So they're essentially, the way I kind of read this Dewey Square Group, they're like a paid fixer.
Yeah, they're influencers, fixers. They have deep pockets, and most importantly, they have tentacles into the politicians they need to have tentacles into.
So they'll essentially take $1 from anybody for any campaign. If you say, hey, I need you to help me win over public opinion on X, Y, or Z, they say, sure, give me $10 million and we'll take care of it.
Yeah.
They don't really care who's it coming from.
And it's party politics. And I think what's interesting about this, when you look at towns like Duxbury, towns like Shrewsbury, Needham, Wellesley, Waltham, or Weston. A lot of these towns are wealthy towns that are heavily Democratic, as is the whole state, that the citizens were very much against this. So I do think you have a machine that doesn't necessarily listen to the people, right? Especially on these issues. It isn't really not a right-left thing in a lot of ways. It really is, well, Massachusetts is a one-party state. We're going to get a pile of cash from that. But if you look at the people that were against this, in a lot of these towns that were highly Democrat Party, those were the people that were against it.
Exactly.
So it is that disconnect between the money and the resident.
Yeah, and I'm going to read here a statement from that Dewey Square Group. What they actually do. It says, over 30 years, DSG has helped businesses, nonprofits, campaigns achieve their public affairs goals. Let us help you win public opinion. How do you get out the vote when your candidate is yes or no? You call Dewey Square Group because we do this every day.
These are what's called AstroTurf, if you remember the day. There was these AstroTurf campaigns. The money that came into Shrewsbury did not come from Shrewsbury. Everybody that supported at the local level, from a select board level and from a planning board level, and the people that were the chair people of the Yes Committee, they were all involved in knowing exactly what was happening, you know, and it was to crush any real public opinion internal to the town.
Yeah, so that's just, unfortunately, this is what goes on in politics. So you have, a governor who gets a lot of funding, and any of these larger campaigns, I think, people articulate that if you want to run for governor now, I think it's something like $10 or $12 million that you need to run a campaign. So once you're in there, in order to invoke policy, you actually don't want to listen to people, because those people are not giving you the money that's helping you sustain the role you're in.
Yeah.
So you listen to all these other special interest developers and these other likes, right? And you say, we'll do whatever it takes. You put a bunch of money. We're going to funnel it through a dark money organization to push local towns and try to convince the people who put me here that something that they don't want to do is good for them. And how is that fair and just? To the everyday taxpayer.
And at the end of the day, there will be litigation or a complaint against one Commonwealth for breaking the rules. They have lots of obviously high-powered people and high-powered attorneys, so who knows what will happen. But this type of thing should happen. Residents and average people should be able to say, hey, that doesn't seem pretty cool.
No. Well, I hope you guys have learned something here about, these organizations, how they get money into local politics. And now you can see it, now you can say, oh, that happened in Shrewsbury. So now you can understand how this all works. So I hope everybody stays around for, our next episode. You can always contact us at contact@theunselects.com. Check us out on Facebook. But until our next episode, I'm Gregg Richards.
And I'm Brian Costello.
And we are the Unselects.